Welcome to Going Deep. Brandon Angelo, Matt Waldman. The season's about here, my man.
Oh yeah, we're getting in the thick of it. I'm excited. Not tomorrow. This time tomorrow night will be almost probably the third quarter here. So
Yeah.
I'm excited, man. This will be fun.
Yeah, it should be great. And we've got a good lineup for you. We're going to talk about some NFL and college slate stuff. Who do we anticipate will have a hot start, slower finish among the rookies? What late round additions to a team post waivers do we expect to make a mark on their new roster? And a couple of college players that each of us have studied that we want to talk about here. So that's kind of what's going on. I have one of my last drafts going on. This is like a 30-year-old league, and I'm proud to say,
tis the season.
Yeah,
man.
it is the season.
Tis the season,
and I am the two-time returning champion. I have split it with DLF 2 years ago, and then last year I won it. This year we're in the middle of a draft. We had to resuscitate the league last minute. Kudos to our commissioner, Louis Gennard.
yeah.
So, if I'm a little bit out of it here and there, I've got 5 rounds left, and I've got back-to-back picks, so I may be taking a couple. But let's start off, while we're doing this, with, your thoughts, Brandon, on who do you think's going to have a hot start but a slower finish among the rookies in this class?
hot start, slower finish. I think one of them could be Xavier Worthy.
Okay.
And I think the main reason why is with Marquise Brown coming back in the fold in probably the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks the longest, you have 4 pretty viable options in that core, right?
Right.
So you got Kelsey, you got Rice, Checo out of the backfield. Then you also have Worthy, right? Then you have Kelsey. So it's a lot of, will Patrick spread the ball around? Will Worthy be more of a situational threat? I think next year he takes over and I think he might dominate the yardage totals starting next year. But I think with obviously Rice and Brown and Kelsey and Pacheco, that's a lot of mouths to feed, I think, in the passing game, too. I think the running backs will be more involved this year, too, as teams will probably play a little more too high, I think, with the addition of Worthy and also Brown, too, as being a deep threat. I think he's one I think that comes off the top of my head. One of them might be Bucky Irving.
Yeah,
I think the hype is really big surrounding Bucky Irving right now. I think he might take a little bit to get adjusted to the speed of the game, but also too, it's one of those interesting situations where I think he's more talented as a runner, like instinctually, than Rachaad White. So I'm interested to see what the split is going to be in Tampa. Will they go? I know Bulls had said today that he's going to go hot hand approach, and we'll see who gets what. But that will be an interesting backfield to monitor as the season goes on.
Let's add Sean Tucker to that list because they're incorporating more zone into this offense, and Tucker's best part of his game is the cutback. He's a good cutback zone runner, and I don't think that's Rachaad White's strength. I think Bucky's pretty good at that, but I think that Tucker's the most natural cutback runner and the best big play guy. He might have the best combination of size, speed, and traits you're looking
100%
for
in that backfield. Absolutely.
Yeah, so he's that guy that I'm like, waiver wire watch list, like keep him high on that list as far as your running backs go because of that. But I love the picks there that you've got, and the same with Worthy because scheme wise. That's the big question. Are they going to be able to, our defense is just going to shut that down, and then the pecking order of what you've got going on, they'll incorporate him on some shallow stuff, but is he going to really get the lion's share of the wide receiver one type of work when you've got Marquise Brown and Rashee Rice there? And you look at the history of the Eagles' offense and Andy Reid's offenses and wide receivers. They've had Terrell Owens and they've certainly had T.O. and Tyreek Hill, but this offense has won without having multiple receivers really dominating on the scoreboard.
Right. Yeah, I think it's gonna. I think Andy Reid, obviously the post Tyreek Hill realm, especially, it's a spread the ball around approach, right? It's really a week to week thing schematically with Andy. It's whatever's going to work against who he's facing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big one too, and also too who's healthy. That's a big one. With obviously Travis Kelce getting up there in age, Marquise Brown being an oft injured guy. Who knows what happens with Rashee Rice, if he's going to see a suspension this year or not. So kind of, although there's a lot of things going on in that room, but I think Worthy is, in my opinion, the 2025 bet to be the yards leader in Kansas City. 2024, I think he might see a couple boom games, but I think it's a little more volatile.
Yeah, no, I think those are great. I think for me, it's going to be Jaden Daniels. I think he's going to get off to a hot start. I think you're going to see, we talk about that offense a lot. Cliff Kingsbury, certainly you're going to see play action. You're going to see a lot of run pass option kind of things with the RPOs, but also with misdirection off of play fakes with that strong running game, and hopefully get Jaden in the space where he's got a couple reads on one side of the field. Not that he can only do that, but you're going to certainly see that's what they like to do in that offense. And if you look at Cliff Kingsbury's offense, once they start doing that, then they're going to get tested with defenses saying, let's shut some of that down and make Jaden show that he can, at an NFL level, get to his second and third read.
Right.
And then are we looking at Robert Griffin and Marcus Mariota, or are we looking at a guy who can be more than that in terms of reading the field and making good decisions and running the ball not into a brick wall? Those are things that I'm a little worried about with him. I think we're going to see that kind of be a thing. I think we're going to see the same with Marvin Harrison.
Interesting.
Because I've been looking, it's one of my bold predictions or my insanity predictions today is that, I haven't budged on Marvin Harrison. I think he's going to catch, a fair bit of balls, but it's going to be like he's going to get somewhere between 900 to 950 yards. And that's not wide receiver 15 by ADP numbers for people.
Sure.
That's like wide receiver 36. Wide receiver 35.
Right.
And people are, I know that sounds insane, but I want, here's some things to think about. He's great being physical. He's got violent hands off the line. He is good at, with defenders tight to him, tracking the ball over his back. He is great at those things. Absolutely excellent at those things. So if you have a quarterback who trusts him, who's going to hang in that pocket and hit him on those routes, your money. But does he have a quarterback who's going to hang in that pocket and hit him on those routes? And I would argue the answer is no, because we haven't really seen that. I think he'll get some easy plays early, or he'll get some defenses won't play him as tight early. I think he'll get a chance to show some things early that he does well, that he did well at Ohio State. And then defenses are going to say, let's put our best cornerback on him and press, and let's make him beat us off the line. Where what I saw on film is a guy who opens his chest too much to the defender and gets jammed early and rerouted to the boundary when there was a defender who could do it at the Big Ten level, which there weren't many, but when they did, it happened. So worried about that. And let's also talk about timing routes and hanging in there as a quarterback to make the play on time. We don't see that with Kyler Murray. And if you look at the 3 years that Kyler Murray has started all enough games to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback, which he has for 3 years.
Right.
He's had one wide receiver even get inside the top 24. Only one. And that was DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 4 2 years ago. Yep. And I'm sorry, but DeAndre Hopkins, a wizened DeAndre Hopkins, is a lot better receiver right now than I think Marvin Harrison is. It's just Marvin Harrison could get there, and he could get there fast, fairly quickly. But I don't think he's going to get there that fast. And, and when you start talking about, you've got Trey McBride, who we've seen proven as a top 12 option when you feed him. You've got Marvin Harrison. You've got Mike Wilson or
Michael Wilson.
Michael Wilson is pretty good. They want to run the ball, and that almost a third of Kyler Murray's fantasy production, all 3 of those years, came with his legs, and that he had the lowest yardage total, third lowest yardage totals each of those 3 years among the top 12 quarterbacks in terms of that. I look at that and I think, am I really thinking that Marvin Harrison can have a dominant season, top 15? No, I think he's going to get shut down like by midseason, and it's going to be frustrating because Kyler's going to be running around and rerouting, and he spreads the ball around enough to get his yardage. But the big opportunities where you throw and trust that wide receiver, he's not going to do it because he doesn't have time. His eyes are going to drop from the coverage. He's going to try and run. He's going to force Harrison to reroute. And I don't think Harrison is that dynamic of an athlete as a stop-start mover.
Yep, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head. I think the one qualm I had with Marvin Harrison Jr. coming out of Ohio State was he will struggle after the catch in the NFL because he struggled at Ohio State after the catch. And you're right. A lot of that is the decel to acel, just being a really abrupt yet fluid mover laterally. He doesn't really have that. He's not bad. He's good. He's good decel coming back football, good on curl comeback patterns, right? But when we're talking about hard breaking routes, middle of the field, 2 things. He's not great at those type of things, pushing off the inside of his foot, getting to the middle of the field, getting the football. That's not his forte. And that's not Kyler Murray's forte.
Yeah.
So that's not something that Kyler Murray does particularly well in terms of timing patterns. Because you're right. Once pressure gets there, eyes drop. Kyler's looking to either scramble outside the pocket, look for a boundary read or take off. I actually agree with that one as well. I think that could definitely happen. I hope he has a great season, but I could see it going in the realm of, 950 and 7.
Yeah.
Could very well happen.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're going to take a little draft break here.
Love it.
With it. So I'm in the 17th round of this league. And I'm going to ask you what you think here. Because I
love it. Hit it.
Kamani Vidal or Dylan Lobby or both. I could also get Andre Yosivas here. So, or Ricky Pearsall.
I think Ricky Pearsall, obviously, because the draft capital is huge.
Okay.
But I also think it's tough to predict what his role is going to look like even next year in terms of target share, right? I mean, that's it.
And it's a keeper league, so I can only keep 3, so I'm probably not going to get to keep him unless he explodes this year.
I think the 2 players out of those that have the biggest starter upside, Lobby and Yosivas.
Yeah.
I think there's a world we live in where next year Dylan Lobby is the RB1 of the Raiders. From a snap share perspective, and you and I both liked him coming out.
Yeah.
I think Yosivas, could help the decision to not keep T. Higgins if he shows the development that we both think he has. Kamani Vidal is interesting because I think Harbaugh next year, with this next draft of really strong running backs, takes one in the first 40. Yeah. I think that's, in my opinion, that is something that is probably going to happen. Like, there is no better back for Harbaugh than Ali Gordon. Like, that is a Harbaugh. That is a Harbaugh dream.
Yeah.
But I think a back goes early next year to the Chargers. I think if Greg Roman's still there as well, I think that's going to be something that he pushes for. Because obviously, like, Dobbins and Edwards are good, but both are near the tail end of their careers, in my opinion. They need a better talent. Vidal's a nice fit. If he sees the field enough this year, he could push for that. But I don't think he is dynamic enough to keep a lead job and keep Harbaugh away from the early pick at back. So I would probably say Yosivas and or Lobby.
That's what I did because time's already up. We're on a minute clock, but I like that too. Just to share, because everyone else shares with us, right, who their fantasy team is and what they want to know. I'll just give you guys a quick rundown. My keepers were Patrick Mahomes, A.J. Brown, and Brandon Ayuk. I used to pick. I had CeeDee Lamb, Mahomes, and Brown last year as my keepers. Lamb was no longer eligible. So then my draft picks, in no particular order, Najee Harris, Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, Ezekiel Elliott, Ray Davis, and Dylan Lobby as my running backs. My wide receiving core, Ayuk, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Khalil Shakir, Tyler Lockett, Jonathan Mingo, Andre Josephus. Surprise, surprise with some of those names. I'm sure many of you know some of those are RSP favorites. Geno Smith is my second quarterback. Tyler Conklin's my second tight end. Sam Laporte is my first tight end, who I also had last year. And ironically enough, this was the league that I told people I detailed at Football Guys, where I missed my first round pick because my wife was graduating from law school and I was traveling, and I missed my first round pick, and then I drafted the wrong Dalton. I was trying to draft Dalton Kincaid, and I picked Dalton Schultz because I was in a hurry, and I did one of those rookie draft mistakes, and then I said, you know what, I'm following up with Sam Laporta because he's my second favorite tight end in this class, and that worked out pretty good.
It did work out pretty well.
So that's my draft. I've got two rounds left. I'm picking a kicker and probably picking Ricky Pearsall, or Kamani Vidal, or maybe Isaac Guerrero at that range, or even Khalil Herbert because I love him, or Calvin John Austin. Those are some of my options.
Yeah, Calvin
along
Austin
with a kicker.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we'll see, as Joe Milton went off the board by a team. So we'll see how, so you can see where we're at the dregs with some of this, but that's where we're at. So speaking of getting back on track here, how about late additions, after, waivers now for the NFL? Who are some late additions to teams that you think are going to make a new mark on their roster?
I would say the one that comes to mind is Tim Patrick.
Yeah.
Because I think he fills a void in that Lions receiver room that they thought, Donovan Peoples-Jones was going to fill when they acquired him. It's that outside X role where you can get a big-bodied guy in the red zone who's a little more dynamic than Josh Reynolds, bigger frame, bigger radius, but just as reliable. Honestly, at this point in their careers, a healthy Tim Patrick and a healthy Courtland Sutton, there's not that much deviation, in my opinion. So I think you get a really good player in Tim Patrick if he's healthy. Obviously, he's had the dreaded Achilles ACL, back-to-back, but I think a guy like Tim Patrick can really help them down the stretch. And I think that's a phenomenal addition for Dan Campbell and co. I think that's fantastic for them and Jared Goff, and just having another piece that get him up to speed, you can trust him. But also, too, it gives you more flexibility with moving around Jameson Williams. I think he's kind of the X factor of that offense this year because he seems like he's taken another step in terms of maturation as both a player and a person. That's going to be really big for that offense. We saw a bit in the playoffs too, especially against the 49ers.
Yeah.
But I think that could be a big one too, moving him around, causing problems too with obviously St. Brown and being able to really utilize his skill set as a zone beater. And then you obviously have Gibbs and his dynamic nature as a receiver. So Tim Patrick can really be kind of a solidified piece to that offense that they've been missing that piece for years. They haven't had a dominant outside X go up and get it guy you can trust since Calvin Johnson.
Yeah.
Like they haven't had that outside receiver, and I think that's been something Dan Campbell's been wanting. You can see kind of by, Donovan Peoples-Jones, trade. I think it was like last year. So he's been looking, and I think he's found a guy that can be reliable in Tim Patrick.
Nice. I'm going to give two guys. One surprise. People are waiting for me.
I know what's going to be.
Yeah, but I'm going to start with Samaje Perine, who's a similar player. So, we're going to look at, when you look at Perine, he's kind of like a plus version of Darrell Williams for Andy Reid.
Sure.
And, I think that Andy Reid varies things up enough with his running backs that, Isaiah Pacheco is going to get enough red zone love that he's going to still be a top 15 to top 20 running back. I just think what P. Ryan does is it eliminates that top 5 upside that some people think somehow Isaiah Pacheco was going to have, but I didn't think that was going to happen anyway. I think P. Ryan is a fine receiver. He's a good pass protector, and he's literally a tractor trailer as a power back. I mean, you're not stopping him when he gets downhill, and he's just gotten better with age, more confident. And the burst was always there for him at Oklahoma. It's just that it's always this way with backs. When they start off in the league, and they're guys like Montgomery or someone like that, or Jordan Howard, people are like, oh, they look so slow. And part of it is they are slower, but they're also getting acclimated to what they can and can't do and what to read and how to do it. And I think that P. Ryan was a great example of that. And now that he's been in the league long enough, I can foresee him, especially with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If Clyde Edwards-Helaire is on a list right now due to PTSD, and it stems from something that happened years ago, that tells you that it's come to a head. And we wish the best for him, obviously. But that's come to a head that if he's been battling it that long and just it's really realized, okay, I need to do something about this, or the team has realized they need to do something about this, this is one of those things you might anticipate. He might not be back. He might not be back anytime soon.
100%. I think I remember something similar with Zay Flowers when he was at the Bills. You remember that a while ago? And it's one of those things where you can't put a timetable on it. And I think that's part of the reason why they went out and got P. Ryan.
Yeah.
Is they need to bring in a veteran that can learn the system right away, or at the very least be able to help out in third down and or 2-minute situations.
Yeah.
And take some load off Pacheco, because I do think Pacheco's in for a career year this year. I think he could do some pretty. I think they have 1,210, right? I don't think that's out of the realm for a guy like Isaiah Pacheco. But definitely when we get to December, January, February, you want to make sure your big weapons are healthy in the playoff. And P. Ryan's a guy that can take some heat off Pacheco and also help keep Pat Mahomes upright in some of those big games for sure. It's a great signing by KC.
Yeah, and a similar player that I think everybody's been wanting me to asking me about on X is Christopher Brooks. Going to Green Bay, and I think the answer is this: in theory, it's a great fit because Brooks is someone who catches the ball well. He can run for power. He can give you what A.J. Dillon was supposed to give you. And I think he can do that as well as I really liked A.J. Dillon coming out, but I think Christopher Brooks has shown enough that you could have hope that he could have replaced that Dillon role and maybe been a little bit more versatile as a runner between the tackles. Now in practice, though, we just don't know. Is he really going to get an opportunity? Or was this the GM saying, hey, this looks like a good player, let's add him, and the coaching staff's that's fine, but we're invested in Marshawn Lloyd. We're invested in Emmanuel Wilson, and, they look at it from that perspective. And I think if that happens, we could see Christopher Brooks just stuck on the practice squad, and never come off it and then end up getting cut and then get labeled just a guy by the league. And, I just watched somebody pick Adonai Mitchell in the 20th round and go, I didn't realize he was still there. So, my bad.
He's honestly, if he was there, so he's one, obviously coming in, and you and I talked about him at length, coming into the draft, wasn't a fan. Reason being, him playing an outside role in the NFL, I think would be an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
With Josh Downs being out for probably the next couple weeks, with that ankle, Mitchell's going to get the play in the slot.
Yes.
In a Shane Steichen scheme that is favorable to slot receivers. He's going to get easy targets, be able to create in a two-way go, and get his confidence up because he's as talented as some of the upper echelon receivers in this draft, right? Yeah. In terms of talent, he's right there with Brian Thomas Jr. But it was all the other stuff that that, in my opinion, lack of production and the reports about attitude, etc., that pushed him down boards. But he cleans that up and gets to play in the slot. And in Indy, he might not come off the field.
That's right.
And he's more talented than Josh Downs. I think Josh Downs is a tick more reliable, but I think Mitchell gives you an element as a vertical separator, especially from the slot, that Downs doesn't give you, which is a really interesting role in an offense that wants to be more vertical. They don't have that guy though, right? Pittman's okay.
Pierce
right?
hasn't done anything.
Alec Pierce hasn't done it yet, and will he ever? Probably not.
Doolin's an athlete, nothing.
Correct. Yep, they don't have that downfield threat to pair with the arm talent of Anthony Richardson, and he's that guy and can really open up that offense and open up Anthony Richardson's game. And I'm excited about it because I think the kid is super talented. If he's figured it out, gets a player role that fits his skill set, and it seems like he has, that's a home run.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, what about it? Let's talk about some players from the college game that we're looking at, and we say, you know what? I just want to talk about this guy. Whether it can be because you like him and think that he's going to be worthwhile for the NFL, you enjoyed watching his game.
Sure.
You know, anything from a scouting perspective that will help people also kind of get a better idea of what it is you look for and kind of the nuances of what you're studying.
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Two players that I think are risers that I'm high on coming in the next class. Number one, Cam Ward out of Miami. I think you and I talked about him a little bit last show before he had his blow-up game against Florida in the Swamp. When you watched him at Washington State, all the off-script stuff, him extending play is fantastic, right? But could he learn to play on schedule? Could he learn to fit the ball in the tight window, step in the pocket, and make the right decision? That was kind of, that remained to be seen. We saw that against Florida in a pretty hostile environment in the Swamp. And I think we saw the flashes of, in my opinion, I think he's the most talented quarterback in this 2025 cycle. I don't know if he gets picked first. I think it goes to probably Becker, Sanders, one of those two guys, I think. But I think Ward is one of those guys where an NFL team is going to want that arm talent paired with the escapability. Because that's a trump card of guys like Russell Wilson and guys who can really, like Caleb Williams in this class too, just a magician in terms of feeling pressure and knowing when to escape. There's a play in the Miami game. If you guys haven't seen this, listen to this. Watch the Miami game against Florida. There's a play when he spins left on the move, floating towards the boundary, flicks it 30 yards down the field, hits his receiver in stride, running across the end zone. Like, there are just not many quarterbacks, not even in this draft, but you can 8 to 10 quarterbacks in the NFL can maybe make that throw, maybe less. And I think an NFL GM is going to be really excited about that potential because, there are some bonehead plays in the kid's game, but I mean, his ability to extend plays is second to none in this cycle. And I think he's a really intriguing talent. And I'm excited about him next year. I think he goes in the top 10, top 12 at the very latest. Another guy I think, and this is more so, Matt, and you can talk to this too. When I was watching Oregon tape in 23, the one guy I kept coming back to, like, who the hell is 15? Like, who is 15? I'm looking at Bo Nix and Troy Franklin and Bucky Irving, and I kept coming back to, who is 15? And I kept writing that. I'm like, who is this kid? Tez Johnson. He was the best receiver on the Oregon offense. And he was an absolute chain mover for them. Had like 86 receptions for like 1,100 and 10 touchdowns. And I watched their opening game against Idaho, which is a weird opponent. But when you watch that game, they it was a weird game for them. But He had 12 receptions, like 80 something yards, 81 yards, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. But a guy of his frame, 5'10 ish, 160 to 170 pounds, plays in the slot primarily. But I think he played like 93+% of his snaps in the slot last year in 23. He's an absolute chain mover with the ability to create after the catch. And he has some downfield capability with his speed, but his ability to separate in short areas and be a low red zone threat, he's going to get comparisons to Tank Dell day and night. I don't see it in a sense because Tank Dell can play inside out, and he's a great vertical separator. Tej Johnson isn't the vertical separator that Tank is, but the one area that I loved from Tank's game coming out of Houston was his ability to separate in the low red zone, his ability to be a quarterback-friendly option in the low red zone. And that is exactly what Tej Johnson is on the low red zone in high leverage situations. Tej Johnson is one of the best in the nation, and I think he's going to be probably a day 2 pick. At this point, at this juncture, I think the NFL is catching on to some of the slider framed receivers. And I think the reason why is, and we talk about from a scouting perspective, like what is important to look at with some of these guys. And the reason slider receivers are kind of becoming more of the norm, I would say, is decelerating mass is easier when there's less mass to decelerate, right? Re-accelerating mass is easier when there's less mass to decelerate. So a guy like Tej Johnson, similar to Tank Dell, similar to Greg Dortch, similar to Devonta Smith, similar to Jordan Addison, these guys win with twitch and precision and the ability to re-accelerate after the catch, and some of that stuff that Tej Johnson does really well at the upper tier of this next 2025 receiver class. And he has the ability to position himself in ways that a guy that's 205, 210 pounds can't. Because the lack of mass, that is an actual advantageous tool to what he does well. And I think people are going to see it as a demerit. Hey, he's too small. He's one of the better short area separators that I've seen in the past few classes, especially when we talk about high leverage situations in the low red zone. Those are 2 very integral areas when we're looking at receiver play in the NFL, what offensive coordinators are looking at. But that's going to be one of the main reasons guys like Tank Dell stick around the league for so long. That's why part of the reason why Devonta Smith's had 1,000 yards almost every single year in his career, right? 100 targets every single year.
No, I think that's a
big deal.
Yeah, that's a great explanation and a good pick. I think for me, one of the guys that just stands out right away is Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State. 6 feet, 224, at least that's the listed height and weight. What I like about running backs who are at that size is they're going to obviously they're designed to run into traffic. And what I like about him is that he understands play designs well. He sets up double teams well. He has a good feel for really getting his defenders into blockers in that respect. Mm-hmm. I like that he gets his feet high. A lot of running backs I see don't always run with their knees and feet high and he does a good job of that consistently in traffic or when he sees a defender shooting for him or anticipates situations where defenders are going to shoot for him. Even if he can't see it, like Alvin Kamara was great at this, is that when he passes a defender, he knows that defender's likely shooting for his feet, and he kicks that heel up to his butt, or he gets his knees high when he's facing the pursuit. So those are things I really like about Singleton, and they're 2 things that fit really well for what you want from a runner who's going to get a fair bit of volume. Is do they stick to the play design pretty well, and can they get through trash to get extra yardage? Because the power's there. I think the acceleration and speed are there. He may not be like super high end at that level, but I think it's pretty good. I think it's going to be more than acceptable for a starter. So I like him. The Rutgers kid, Kyle Monangai.
Yeah.
He's 5'9", 210 is kind of the listed weight there. And I think let me make sure I'm got my comp right from him. Yeah. So my comp for him is Devonta Freeman. Okay.
Okay, I
It's
love
kind
that.
of a Devonta, he's Devonta Freeman in size. When you watch his game, he too, he's versatile. He can run zone, he can run gap, run the duo plays. He sets up blocks well. He is a determined runner who gets his pads down and works through multiple points of contact. And what I love is that he has 410 career touches in 3 years and no
No
fumbles.
fumbles.
No
Yep.
fumbles. And this sounds very Tom Coughlin, old school, conservative, kind of like fumbles aren't that big a deal, are they? But when I started looking at the past RSP grading that I've done this summer, I found that only 3% of the running backs in the past, I think, 6 years, who have of running backs who've hit like elite fantasy production, only 3% of them, or 3% of all running backs who've done that, were guys who fell below a certain tier of ball security, like adequate level of ball security, and only 10% of the guys who were even like running back ones or running back twos fell below that. So it was very important that you hold on to the ball. And so I'm talking about guys I graded in college who who were below an acceptable tier in ball security. So not even if they've improved or not, with that. So, and sometimes when you improve, when you work on your ball security and you have to focus on that late, it changes how you run. It changes,
Yeah, absolutely.
because now you're focused on holding on to the ball, and maybe you're not looking at things as fluidly as you were before. Maybe you don't know how to make those second effort plays as well, because now you're focused on the ball security rather than getting your feet up, rather than integrating it all into your game. Now you're just deathly afraid that you're not gonna stay on the team because you fumbled a lot. A good example of that, and we learned from a previous show that I did with Russ Landy, is he talked about how a very common thing you'll see in the NFL, we always hear about the archetype of the veteran player who helps out the young player, like Michael Carter helping out Trey Benson this summer and saying, he's been a big asset to Trey Benson. We hear about those a lot in the media. What we don't hear about is the player who comes in who's, especially the running back, who's played for 8-9 years, and he'd like that other payday. He just got signed by a team. He's a veteran, but there's a hot young guy in camp who's been playing really well all preseason, and then instead you hear that guy at halftime maybe chirping to him, "Yeah, you played well, but you better hold on to that ball because they'll cut you. They'll cut you if you don't hang on to that ball. They don't care what you did in the first half of this game." And next thing you know, you're all paranoid because the vet who's seemingly on your side, on your team, and I'm going to give you a perfect example of this. And I'm not saying it happened this way, but Russ brought it up when I mentioned this. Tyson Williams, who was a camp star the year before, and then during that following year, and they used him as the starter against the Raiders, and he broke off a big run for a touchdown in the first half. And then in the second half, he fumbled in the first half. In the second half, he looked deathly afraid. He was carrying it tight. He looked slow. He was like not the same player. And Latavius Murray, who had been on a couple of teams before then, ended up finishing that season as like their guy. They rotated in Freeman, they rotated in other guys, but that's a big deal. And I think that you look at a guy who has no fumbles and 410 career carries, and you see that with Monangai, and I say that's a rugged dude. He's playing at a Rutgers team that isn't great, so he's taken and he's taken it to some pretty good Big Ten teams. So not the fastest. He's kind of one of my he's one of those guys that I tend to default to that maybe have a longer career in the league than they have a big fantasy career that I may have favorites to.
Yeah,
But I think he
for
can
sure.
be. I think he's one of those guys that could sneak in there and find his way. And this is I think this is a strong running back class. I agree with you from what I've seen thus
Yeah,
far.
it's a really strong, like top to bottom. It's one of those things. I think the two headliners of this class at the running back position, I think it's Gianti and Gordon.
Okay.
I think those two are the most. I'd say both are unique in different ways. I think a team like the Chargers is going to fall in love with Gordon.
Yeah.
And then, you're going to see another team, if like the Saints move away from Kamara, or if the Broncos want a true RB1 and they want another Kamara type player with Sean Payton and Austin Gianti.
Yeah.
There's like Singleton's another one in this class too. Devin Neal. There are a ton of dudes in this class that are legitimate playmakers at the position that are deserving of second, third round capital.
Yeah.
But I wonder how saturated that gets, because this is gonna be interesting to see too, because there's a lot of veterans kind of at the tail end of their career now in the NFL, right? Obviously, your Derrick Henrys, your James Connors. You can talk about Christian McCaffrey in that light. Your Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley in a sense is getting up there with all the injuries, right? There's some guys that are getting to either the tail end of their career, or they're just past that apex a little bit. So do teams go younger and invest more capital in this really strong young class? I don't know, but this is one of the stronger classes in recent memory, top to bottom. I mean, you're going to have guys in the fifth round that should be the day two guys, right?
Yeah. Phil Maffa of Clemson is a
Phil Maffa. He was better than, if you watch that Clemson tape coming out. I know Will Shipley got all the hype going into last year. He was a better back than Will Shipley in most respects.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
How about Mario Anderson, the Memphis running back from South Carolina? I watched him this weekend, and I was like, he reminds me a little bit of a better version of Zach Moss, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's some dudes.
Yeah. Maffa gives you kind of a Stephen Davis, Leonard Fournette style of play. Maybe not to that high of a level, obviously. Jarquez Hunter. I was watching this kid, and the way he moves, even like. And then even like the other day, I've been on X talking about Dean Connors of Rice, who
Dean Connors,
who he's in that Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift vein in terms of like, the evolution. Like I'd say, Eckler's the apex, Swift is like below that, lacking some of what Eckler has, and then Connors is this guy you watch and you go, if you can learn how to stay with the play design. The footwork, the hips, the acceleration, he runs to open space. He's very good at like I think he'd be a good punt returner if he can field punts. Like if he could field punts, he could stick as a punt returner because he has that caliber of that quality of game. And he's a very good pass receiver. I would say that is a characteristic of his game that could get him situational time eventually. And at worst, he's like a Myles Gaskin kind of situational play at some point. And this guy's like, this guy's well below all those names on the list that we talked about, but still interesting.
We're going to get guys that are risers, man. I mean, it's one of those classes where, it's just a lot of unknown. I think the big solidified group in this class to me is running back. This is a really strong top to bottom running back class.
And we're going to get into the thick of that all year long, as well as what we do with the NFL. As always, check out, Brandon Angelo at Angelo_fantasy. You got me at Matt Waldman. And, thanks again for your patronage, especially as we get into, the RSPs into its 20th year. This is my 21st year doing this. So I appreciate that. It's a privilege to be able to have guests like Brandon. Not guests, co-hosts like Brandon. He was a guest once, and then I went nuts and said we both were like, we got to do this. We got to do this, and I'm so thankful that he's joined me for year 2 for this, and that I've had a good share. I've had a really hit on a good share of co-hosts for different shows who bring unique characteristics to the game that either I don't or that just delve in, complement us each other well in terms of what we do. And Brandon is certainly at the top of that list. So, thank you, folks, and you'll be tuning into us again hopefully in a couple of weeks, and we'll be doing it every other week on Wednesday nights, out on Thursdays. Take care.